when we finally did break up, after the experience of being with this revolutionary man who knew all the answers, knew, as I said, he was like the sun and I was like the earth. He like knew a million times more than me. So whenever I would speak, he would correct me. And I realized that by the end of living with him, I knew his opinions on everything. I didn't have any opinions because I never got to say my opinion. I didn't, get to. So I began to see this relationship between men and women could be not so good for the woman. Okay. So, I was in a very select group. So I learned my Marxism. I knew the women's movement. I knew my history.
Well, tell about the start of the women's movement.
So by the time I got back to New York, I was ready. I was prepared. So the river flowed on, the Dow came to me, and I was at some demonstration about the war, and I saw this line of women walking dressed in Vietnamese outfits, saying, "Out of Vietnam." Everybody was saying peace now, but they were saying, "Get out of Vietnam," which I thought was a much better slogan. So I went up to them and I said, "Who are you?" And these were the women who were starting the women's liberation movement, and that was a major, wonderful, amazing experience in my life, and
I can
totally
give a
changed.
little history background there.
Yeah.
Because in 1963, the book A Feminine Mystique was published, and it started to say, why are women second class citizens? Why are women always having to just cook and clean and take care and be secretaries and never allowed to run a company, never allowed to go out and get a real important job where decision making is important.
So I think, walking into this room with these women, the minute I walked into the room, I was a different person. And I won't say a different person. What I would really say is I was my true self, my truest self. The shackles of being a girl, being a woman, identifying myself as half of the human race was gone. I was a person. And again, it's that sense of soul. I was that soul that could look at, and I think this is the most interesting thing to me about what happened in the women's movement, is that you removed yourself from society and you looked at society from the bird's eye view. You could look at and what happened in that room, which was such a hydrogen bomb, if you want to call it. What happened is each person were no longer the victim of their circumstances. They saw themselves as how they were victimized, but they were no longer the victim because they could observe their life and say, aha, that's why I became shy, because nobody listened to me. That's why I became insecure, because when I raised my hand in the class, nobody called on me. That's why I stumble. That's why I start screaming, because nobody's, so we could then understand the various personality developments that really weren't who we were, but were imposed by the society. And the other thing that was so amazingly powerful about it was this was a moment that truths were said that had never been said before. And the first time you say something that's never been said before, it creates a chain reaction that goes around the world.
So, tell me what your role was. That's the movement, but how about Helen?
Okay.
What was she doing?
All right, well, again, here I have to go to reflection, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Just as I say in improv, I don't know how I'm coming across. Other people have to tell me. What I think I was for many people and many of my friends was a role model. I don't like the word role model, but it happened to me so fast, and I was ready for it.
Right, yeah.
I didn't want to get married. I had had a mother who was effeminate, so I was ready. It was like, okay, here you go. Yeah, that's So the first thing I would do as soon as I got into a meeting, do you want to see what the first thing I would do? Hold the mic. I'll see if I can do it. First thing I would do, I can't do it with this shirt. First thing I would do is take off my bra. I would slip it down like this. I would slip it down like on the other side. I can't do it because usually you have a shorter thing. And I would take off my bra and I would throw it away. That was the first thing I would do. And then I would lay there like, in the greatest, because I didn't have to be a girl and I didn't have to be a woman and I didn't have to be anything. I could just be who I was. So I think what I was a demonstration, to some extent of what it was to be, to say, fuck you. Basically, I am who I am. And I think, there were other people that were great theoreticians. There were other people who were, great planners. I was just more or less, as far as just being, and that of course was very inspiring to many people. Because you learn many ways, right? We learn intellectually, we learn emotionally, but we also learn just by seeing people behave in a certain way. And then there were some people who were going out to California. I said, why not? Why not? So I joined in their car and we went out as a group of women that I knew from the women's movement. We went out there and we had a little conflict with the women in California. The New York women's perspective was a little different than the California women's perspective. So we went out there as this, very powerful New York group coming to bring our points of view to the California.
How did the California?
Well, the California women's movement, because California was very radical. They had just had the People's Park. And a lot of the women who were involved in the women's movement out there were also involved with the radical politics. We were separate. Yeah. We separated ourselves from the men. They were still more involved, with working within the male organizations. So, and they were more Marxian oriented than we were. We really wanted to have a whole new, our own interpretation rather than taking, some man who had already, we threw Freud out. We threw out, and one of the things was, we're the experts. Right. Don't have some guy who knows nothing about what a woman's body is like tell us what an orgasm is. Right. Where the hell do you know what a woman's orgasm is? Things like that. We're the ones, let's find out from our personal experience what is the truth. So, we came at that very strong woman's perspective on it. And, so we had some arguments with some of the women there till we brought them over to our point of view.
Okay, so what else can you tell me?
Okay, well, so when I ended up in California, I began, the beginnings of a movement, beginnings of any revolution is wonderful. Yes. Because you feel that sense of joy and liberation. And then after a couple of years, problems show up, whether it's Cuba or Russia or the women's movement. When I began to, as women got more power, then suddenly these wonderful women that everybody listened to each other and there were no egos. That whole thing began to fade, and where we began to see,
get one step above the other. Right?
You began to see women's egos, and what was right. If you had fun at a party, you were a counter-revolutionary. Oy. And, I began to see women doing some things I didn't, think were so great. I began to see women could be just as bad as men. And I got very depressed. Because when I got involved in the women's movement, it was 100%. I so identified with being free on that level of persona, of soul, that it gave me an understanding the rest of my life. I mean, it definitely changed me for the rest of my life. I could never be, nobody could ever tell me I was wrong about something that I knew I was right about. You know, if I knew I was right about it, not that I don't listen, but I knew I was right about it. And, I had that self, awareness and trust that came from that. But I began to see that, I didn't like what I saw going on, in the women's movement. And so I got very depressed. But anyway, I went down to Mexico. And as soon as I was in Mexico, I felt real again.